a doctor in the house? We need to get a medic in here.
Mr. Friedkin.
Hello.
You look wonderful.
Thank you very much. Here's that $20 I promised.
Everybody
Hey, Dominic?
got this?
Would you ask
On the board.
Honestly?
Marcia if those guys are sending me my cash for the trip?
Will do.
Thank you.
Angel, you on the slate?
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
Jesus. Something I
Okay.
said?
So, I'll start. Okay, Billy.
You can call me Mr. Friedkin.
Okay. Mr. Friedkin. Now, we all know that I'm a younger version of you.
I wasn't aware of that, but if that's how you feel about it, I'm flattered.
That's the reality.
Okay.
For many years,
You're not as good looking as me.
I'm not as good looking and I'm not as well fit or endowed. But the thing is that for many years, and we have only begun to be friendly in the last year or so, but before that, you were always a director, a filmmaker that I always found very inspiring for many different reasons.
Well, thank you.
Now, your movie, Sorcerer, has a strange and beautiful odyssey. And I would love to talk to you about that. But the way for me to talk about this movie is to ask you something very specific about the middle of the odyssey. Which is, as I understand it, when you're making this movie, Sorcerer, you are basically untouchable. You have made classics. You have walked among the movie guards for a long time now. The guards are really smiling at you. You go on this journey to make this masterpiece. I will call it a masterpiece. You make the film, you finish the film, and then I want to ask you, when you walk down that gate the morning of the premiere and pick up the LA Times, what was your reaction and what was your expectations like?
I see you've read my book.
Mm-hmm.
The morning after the film opened, I lived in another house, not this one. This is my house, by the way, not Mr. Ruffin's house. He lives in a hovel in a very bad neighborhood of Los Angeles. But
I'm a younger version of you.
that's right. So I had a long driveway then, as I do now, but I walked down the driveway to get the morning papers. And as I brought them up, I always read the film critic for the Los Angeles Times, who was a good friend of mine. His name was Charles Champlin. He had given me only great reviews and very intelligent reviews. He was one of the last of the intelligent film critics in America. But he's always, I felt excessively kind to me. When I opened the paper to his review of Sorcerer, it began with the phrase, "What went wrong?" I thought it would be a great review because Champlin loved everything I ever did, as I say, excessively. So my first reaction was one of surprise and then shock, because he completely took the picture apart. And the point is that echoed what all of the other critics around the country did. It was like a massive negative reaction. And at first, I couldn't believe it. I was really surprised because I felt I had made the best of all my films. I felt this was the best I can do. And these guys all liked the other stuff and they promoted it. And those were the days when a critic for a daily newspaper meant a lot in America.
Right.
It was the difference between success or failure. So I knew instantly that no matter what else, the film was going to be a financial failure.
But why? This is just the critics. What led to the financial failure suddenly?
Well, the critics had a profound effect on what people went to see or didn't see. There was no internet then. There was no really other source of important information except as advertisements, you know, for a film. And every film used phrases from the critics, and very often the phrases from the critics would be on the marquee of the theaters without the name of the star or the director. It would say 4 stars, Roger Ebert.
Right.
You know, not Sorcerer starring Roy Scheider or anybody else.
But the question is more, what led? So the critics are tearing it to pieces.
Pretty much. There
And
were
then-
exceptions.
Right.
Major exceptions, like the critic for Newsweek named
Right.
Jack Kroll, who was a very important critic as well.
Well, we all know that means very little in the end because it's all about the audience. What happened with the audience next?
I think
Where did
that
the movie open in Los Angeles?
it opened around the time, and I'm not sure, as we talk, whether it opened just before or just after Star Wars. And Star Wars marked a massive sea change in what audiences expected out of a film. The audience was getting younger and younger, and I had no idea that their interests were turning more and more to comic book-like films,
Right.
of which Star Wars was the first.
So what happened with your movie?
Well, it had a very brief run and then disappeared. And then it went to Europe, where the film was financed by 2 major film companies in America, Paramount and Universal. And they had joint distribution with one company called Cinema International Corporation in Europe. And the CIC operated kind of separately from Paramount and Universal, and they had the distribution of the film in Europe and in other parts of the world, South America.
Right.
And the film had the same basic response in every country. It was universally declaimed. It was not
Right.
acclaimed, it was declaimed.
And audience across Europe, Asia, were they reacting the same way that the American audience were reacting? Were they negative towards the
To a
movie?
large extent, yes, to a very large, not totally.
No.
There were many great reactions to Sorcerer then, but not enough to make a difference at the box office.
So this was the most expensive movie you'd done up until now, right?
Oh yeah, by far.
Okay, so you had gone from these incredible films, these lucrative financial movies, critical financial movies, to now the most expensive film of your career, and it did not work.
How much time are you going to spend on this, Nick?
Well, because I find
mean,
this is what I
I've
find
told you
interesting.
that the film was a disaster.
Right.
How better can I put it?
Well, I want to know what goes through your mind. Like what?
Oh, you feel like dancing. You
Right.
actually feel like going out and celebrating.
Right.
Buying the best bottle of champagne. You feel terrible.
So
That-
what
that's
did you
what
do?
goes through
So what did you do? Like what goes through someone's reactions when they have reached what you have reached? Because that's what I'm interested in.
I'll tell you what I did. I commit suicide.
Right.
I killed myself. And then I was miraculously returned to life for the purpose of this interview. My film was pretty much as condemned, but I will now tell you very frankly, I never believed this reaction. I always felt that the film was great, and I still do. I think it's a great film. Is it the best film ever made? I couldn't say that. No, but I thought it was the best that I could do. And at that time, in the middle to late 70s, almost everything that I had done, as you point out, was successful. And I felt that Sorcerer was the best I could possibly do. So when it was not going to become a financial success, there is absolutely no substitute in terms of critical success. So if the critics had loved it, but the audience didn't, it would be a failure.
Let's backtrack. After your successes of The Exorcist, French Connection, Poison and Band, and so forth, you're top of the world. Why did you want to make this film at this time? Why this story back then?
First of all, I never and still do not view it as a remake.
Right. So you're talking about The Wages of Fear.
Wages of Fear.
Right.
It was based on the novel The Wages of Fear by Georges Arnaud, a French novelist, and the film of that by H.G. Clouseau.
But why
So-
this story? That's my
Because
question.
the story was, to me, about the mystery of fate,
Okay.
the role that fate plays in the lives of all of us.
Right.
And I had made a film in The Exorcist about the mystery of faith. And I now wanted to make a film that had no supernatural element to it, but was about the mystery of fate. The fact that somebody can walk across the street feeling in the peak of health and get hit by a car.
Right.
That we have no control over our destinies. And that was my feeling at the time.
Right.
I wanted to do a film about people who seemed to have control of their destinies. They were each successful at what they did. There were 4 characters who were not very nice people. And that was another thing I decided to do. Not do this story with heroic figures, with Superman,
Right.
with guys in spandex suits. But I wanted to do it with guys who were not considered good people, like an Arab terrorist was one of the lead characters. A Frenchman who embezzles funds from his father-in-law's company and has to leave France. An American who is the driver for a group of hold-up men, robbers who rob a church, and he's the driver. And the 4th man was a hired killer, who was Hispanic. 4 guys who were outcasts. I wanted them to be the leads in this story because I believed that the audience would follow me wherever I took them. That was my belief.
Right. So after The Exorcist, you decide that this is going to be your next movie. Have you read the book
It
earlier?
took many years before I did it. After The Exorcist was released, I spent 2 to 3 years just going to almost every country in the world.
But just let me ask you this. So, just to go back, so I can understand the chronology. You make The Exorcist, you're traveling the world, supervising this phenomenal success, creatively, artistically, financially. French Connection, same situation a few years earlier. Why this book? Had you read the book earlier on? Had you just seen the movie and then read the book? Or how did that?
I was aware of both by that time. And I certainly thought that the novel was pretty much the equivalent of a kind of an American noir novel, like by someone like James M. Cain or Jim Thompson. You know, it was lean, tough, and very existential.
Right.
The film was as well. And I thought highly of the work of H.G. Clouseau, and I loved the film. I did not want to duplicate what he had done, except to take the same theme, but 4 different characters and completely different events, except for the fact that these 4 men were in 2 trucks driving loads of dynamite to an oil well fire. I took the same basic story as you would if you were doing Hamlet.
Right.
But you could do Hamlet in modern dress, you could do it in a different setting, whatever. And that's how I chose to do Sorcerer, which was based on Le Salaire de la Peur, Wages of Fear. And, and here's the point.
Right.
This was about the idea, which I felt was extremely valid at that point in my life. And that was the fact that each of the countries of the world were beginning to enter a conflict. And yet, nuclear energy, the ability to explode the entire world, had come into being. And the world was endangered and threatened by the possibility that it would blow up if the nations of the world did not cooperate. If they didn't cooperate, even though they didn't like each other or like each other's policies, they would all blow up together. And that thought struck me very powerfully around that point in my life.
So now you travel around the world. You've chosen this as your next film. This is going to be your next William Friedkin production. You come back to Los Angeles. How do you get a movie like this financed?
Oh, at that time they would have financed my nephew's bar mitzvah if I wanted them to do that. And the budget was of no concern. The actors weren't, although initially I had the possibility of 4 or 3 international stars.
And what happened?
Plus Amadou,
Okay.
who was always, I had seen Amadou and then met him when I went to France for The Exorcist. I had seen him in a Claude Lelouch film called Love, Life, Death. L'amour, la vie, la mort. And I thought he was a great actor. He's Moroccan. And I wrote that part for him. We wrote the other roles for Steve McQueen. I knew Steve McQueen and he and I wanted to work together. And then for the other 2 characters, I was going to have Marcello Mastroianni and Lino Ventura. I spoke to them, and Amadou, and that was my cast.
So basically you're going around town saying...
No, I
you
didn't
make
go
this
around town.
No, meaning like that. You were basically, the town was that you were going to make this movie with this cast, and anyone would finance it. Why did it go to Universal and
Because I
Paramount?
had a deal with Universal.
And is that normal that they would co-finance, like co...
No, when the budget came in, they decided to
Who?
take a partner.
Who?
Universal.
Okay, so Universal reaches out to Paramount and says, we have this William Friedkin production.
And Paramount jumped on it.
Okay.
And the man who owned Paramount then was a Viennese man named Charlie Bludorn, who was one of the first of the new moguls.
Okay.
And he is a guy who put together a company that was made up of many separate parts. He owned tobacco fields. He owned a good portion of the Dominican Republic. He owned both the sugar fields and the refineries in the Dominican Republic. He virtually controlled the Dominican Republic. And he said to me, look, if you'll shoot the portion of your film that's in the jungle and in these, in the depressed cities, I have that in the Dominican Republic, and I'll co-finance the film, or I'll finance the whole film.
Okay, so Universal says this budget is expensive or too high. Like, what was the budget coming in at Universal?
I think the actual budget at the time was about 12 to 15 million dollars.
Oh, was that a lot back then?
It was, well, the French Connection had cost $1.8 million, to
Okay.
give you some ideas, a few years before. And the French Connection had gone $300,000 over budget.
And The Exorcist?
And The Exorcist cost about $8 million.
Okay.
Because I shot it forever. I shot The Exorcist for a year.
Okay. So now you have this budget, and you had hired a very good writer. Was there a specific reason for this writer?
Oh, he was one of the most intelligent people I'd ever known.
Right.
We worked in documentaries together before I ever did a feature film.
Okay, so you reached out
He
to this
spoke
writer.
8 languages.
Okay.
He's we've done a lot of work together.
Okay, so you had a
And
great
he wrote
team.
the script of The Wild Bunch,
Oh,
the Sam Peckinpah movie.
right. So you had a great team to start with. You had a great writer. There was you as producer director. You had a great cast, and you had $15 million. Then it went to Paramount. Did Paramount co-finance the 14
Yeah,
to
they
15?
co-financed the film.
And what happened to the stars then?
We wrote the script for Steve McQueen. And I talked with Steve McQueen. I told him what I was doing. He said, it sounds great, and I can't wait to read the script. The minute we had our first draft, I sent it to Steve, and he called me, and he said, this is the best script I've ever read. I'll do this. But you've got to do certain things for me. What? He said, you know, I've just married Ally McGraw. And he said, so if you can't, I can't just bring her with me on what's going to be a long journey. You got to write in a part for her. And I said, you just told me it was the best script you ever read. There is no major role for a woman. I'd have to rewrite the script to write a part for your wife. It's not that I don't like her, I like her very much, but there's nothing in the script for a woman. Very small part for a French woman. And he said, okay. He said, make her an executive producer so she can come with me and she's got a job on the film, not just my wife. And I said, executive producer, that's a bullshit title. I don't believe in that title, and I'm not going to give her any authority over anything, you know. So I'm not going to have somebody around who's got a phony title. He said, okay. He said, shoot the entire film in America. Now, I had chosen these other locations, in part because of Gulf and Western and Blue Dorn and his basic ownership of the Dominican Republic.
So you had a great deal in place
I had,
going in.
and I loved the locations. And I said, Steve, I can't find stuff like that in America. He said, I'm sure it exists. I said, I don't really want to go on a location search. I found the locations I want. So I had turned him down on all three of the points. And I said, oh, fuck it. Who needs Steve McQueen?
Okay, so Steve McQueen falls apart.
Roy Scheider was available. He had just recently done Jaws. I had worked with him in the French
But
Connection.
there was some issue in The Exorcist, correct, with you?
Oh, well,
and-
no, he wanted to do The Exorcist, but the guy who wrote it didn't think he was sympathetic
Right.
as the young priest. And I sort of agreed with him.
So were there issues between you and Roy Scheider
Well, Roy,
coming
no,
in?
not issues, but Roy wasn't happy
Right,
that I didn't go to bat for him.
right.
And I explained to him that it wasn't really my choice.
So why after, so just again, so Steve McQueen falls apart, you decide on Roy Scheider.
Well, here's why. A, he was available. He was the lead in Jaws,
Right.
and Universal loved him.
Okay, so it was a win-win.
Oh yeah, they said, you don't have Steve McQueen, too bad. Roy Scheider, fine.
Would they have financed the movie with an unknown actor, do you think?
No.
Okay, so you needed a star.
Now, Roy wasn't a star, but he was well known.
Right, okay, but you couldn't just cast your neighbor.
Well, who
And-
would anyway? Why would
Well,
I
some
cast
people
my
would.
neighbor? He was a schmuck. I wouldn't even give him a cup of sugar.
But the point is that you were still in a situation where you needed a certain cast to go,
Only one.
only one.
Yeah.
So you go with Roy Scheider, and then Michele Mastroianni falls apart because of billing.
No, actually, it was the other way around. Mastroianni was told by his then wife, Catherine Deneuve, as he told me. Now, I wasn't there, but Mastroianni had a child with Catherine Deneuve. And she, according to him, said to him, you can't go away on a movie for 6 months. I'm not going to let our daughter go with you to these weird places, and you will lose a great deal of custody over your daughter. He reluctantly withdrew. He would have done it.
Okay.
It
but
was
he would-
Lino Ventura
Right.
who would not take second billing to Roy Scheider.
Okay. And
He would to Steve McQueen.
right. And then what happens? Now
So
you,
I had to replace them.
And how did the Universal Paramount feel about that?
You know, they didn't give a shit, frankly,
Right.
because foreign actors at that time in America didn't mean a lot.
But here you are in a situation, you got your known actor, Roy Scheider, you have to cast unknown. Was there, like, how did you go about casting the rest of those, which are incredible casts, and in my opinion, are actually better than the stars you would have gotten. I think they add an authenticity.
We'll never know that.
Well,
It's an opinion.
I'm a younger version of you, so I'm supposed to have opinions.
Look, I am not unhappy with those guys.
Right.
I think they're wonderful. Bruno Kremer took the role that.
How did you find them? Did you
Well,
cast them? Or?
I knew who they were. Bruno Kremer had something of a reputation, not large, in France.
Mm-hmm.
And later he played Inspector Maigret on French television for, I think, at least 10 years.
Okay, and the other guys?
And Francisco Rabal, who took the other part, was again very well known in places like Spain. He was Spanish, and he was known in Spain, Italy, Germany, not known at all in the United States. But he was my first choice to play Charnier, the French guy, in The French Connection.
Right.
It was Paco Rabanne.
Okay.
And he was A, not available then, and B, he didn't speak a word of English when I went after him for The French Connection.
And then the last guy you needed?
Well, the last guy was Amadou, always the same
Right.
guy. Amadou was always, we wrote that part for Amadou.
Because you had him always
Yeah.
going in.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were like a real general in a battle, just going relentlessly up the hill.
I think you could say that, but I didn't think of it at that time.
No, but looking
I
back
always
on it.
looked at making a film as both an adventure and an education. And the people who came along with me shared my feelings.
Right.
They all could have done other simpler films. They could have filmed Doris Day in bed with Rock Hudson if they wanted. But they chose to come with me on these very dangerous adventures.
And the crew you had, was that your usual crew?
To a great extent.
Okay.
The camera operator, who was a Cuban guy named Ricky Bravo, who photographed the Cuban Revolution at Castro's side.
He was your operator?
He was the operator, as he was on French Connection
All right.
and Exorcist.
Okay.
And then I took him as the operator on Sorcerer. But, so I was about to tell you that when I arrived in Tuxtepec for the bridge scene, I see what appeared to be hundreds, and was, in fact, hundreds of people leaving with sacks over their backs. And and I said to my guide, who was Mexican, is this a holiday? I mean, where are they all going? And he went, I said, no, why are all these people from the village leaving? He said, because the director of The Exorcist is here. And it was a very...
What a metaphor.
They were a very religious people then.
Did you care?
I was, well, I didn't want people to leave their fucking homes.
No, but...
Of course I cared.
But not enough to
You-
leave,
No.
because you got a movie to make.
Yeah, but, you know, you can't help what people believe. People believe all sorts of crazy things.
Now, what's interesting is that you have, in a way, these unlikable characters, quote unquote, these anti-heroes, people that are flawed. Something that was also very much in the Exorcist characters, you know, in a sense.
No, you love the little girl.
Well, no,
you
you
love
love the little girl, but
the mother was fine. The
Yeah.
young priest, the
Yes.
older priest, These were good people.
But there were people that were at one point all, questioning their faith or questioning.
Not the
various
old
things.
priest.
No, but the younger one was. And then
The
you had
younger
French
one.
Connection, which also had
Anti-heroes.
a relentless policeman who will do anything to achieve what he achieves. So in a
Yes.
way, there's a theme, character-wise, that went into this movie.
Yes. and
Is
it-
that you?
Yeah. I don't believe in heroes.
So that essentially all these four characters in Sorcerer was a reflection of you.
Yes, I felt I would go all the way with it.
You would go all the way with
No likable characters.
it. Right.
Because, and that's why I don't see a lot of films today.
Yeah.
They're guys who wear spandex suits and they have capes and masks and they fly around and save the world. And to me, this is pornography.
Okay, Billy Friedkin doesn't save the world.
No one does.
Right.
There are no heroes. Every one of us is flawed. Every human being I've ever met or known, especially me, is a flawed human being.
But the four characters in
And
Sorcerer.
sometimes they can step up and do something very good.
Okay, but it's interesting by bringing them down to the harsh level that you bring them in is a very interesting journey for a character. And then having them work their way up to some kind of salvation for their own sins. That's
But
a
there is
beautiful
no
journey.
salvation
There
at
is
the
no
end
ending.
of Sorcerer.
But the thing is that you really go all the way with making these characters very unlikable, which I think is fantastic and unique and brilliant and interesting.
Well, if you do that on your next picture, it's going to bomb. It's going to be a
I
friggin'...
will take that as a very valid point.
Because people don't like that.
But that because it confronts their own fears, do you think? Confronts themselves?
No,
All people are flawed?
for many, many years, not at the very beginning of literature, but for many years, people are interested in heroes and villains.
Right.
People who are either black or white. Now, if you read the works of, for example, St. Augustine, who wrote his Confessions, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, these were very flawed people who wrote about their flaws, who wrote about their sins, and how they eventually found a way out of it through God.
Right.
Especially St. Augustine, who when he was young was a thief, a scoundrel. He had relations with women and just moved on. He writes about all this.
But it's interesting you bring that up because part of the journey of Sorcerer, the Rorschach character, becomes almost metaphysical near the end. There's almost like, in a way, a religious element to that he falls apart in a way that he's able to rebuild himself as a man later on.
Well, he loses if he lives.
If he lives.
In my
But-
opinion, none of them live.
Right. Now, but I still think it's very interesting that you, at this point, go out of your way to make the people as unlikably as you possibly can for good, creative, beautiful reasons. At the same time, you ask for more money than you've ever had before. You go to a place that's far as away as possible from the studios. And then you continue going up the hill in a locations that makes people ill. You lose half your crew, as you say. You had people coming and going. You know, was there a sense of like your own odyssey in this process?
To an extent, I think you could say that, although I wasn't conscious of it at the time. I just did what I wanted to do. It's much more difficult to do what you want to do if you are a film director than, let's say, a writer or a painter. A painter is looking at a blank canvas, he's got some brushes and paints, and he stands in front of the canvas or a work of sculpture and he fills it.
Right.
A writer is looking at a blank page, or today a blank computer, and just with what comes out of his mind's eye, he or she fulfills their artistic impulse. A director of a movie needs like a 10-ton pencil, and you need a lot of people who are collaborators. Now, let me correct something that you've said, and I kind of let it go. I don't mean that these people, these characters, are necessarily all bad or evil, but they were not superheroes. They were flawed. More accurate is to say they are flawed men, extremely flawed, who are confronted with a life or death situation in which they have to cooperate or die.
Yeah, but they're beyond flawed in my opinion, because they contribute to death in every introduction, literally.
Well, not
So-
the French banker.
No,
Not,
but he
Bruno
is
Clement.
literally responsible for the man who commits suicide in a car, you can say, quote
Yes.
unquote. So, but that's, again, that to me is a good thing. But what I find fascinating, and again, being a younger version of you, I'm so interested in this relentlessness that you had at this point.
It's just what I believed.
Right.
That's how I felt about the world. And when I started making films, it wasn't all about superheroes. There are many great examples of the kind of characters we just talked about. The guys in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, they are bad.
Right.
They start good, and then since the film is about greed, they all become greedy. They all let greed take them over, with the possible exception of the Walter Houston character, who is the old prospector. But the lead guy, Bogart, is a very bad individual who will kill his partners to take their share of the money.
Was that an inspiring movie for
Oh,
you?
yes, that's one of the greatest films I had ever seen.
So you almost-
If I could one day make a film as good as Treasure of Sierra Madre, I would quit.
Okay.
I would absolutely quit right there. And I haven't even made a film that goes near the power
So was
of
it
that.
almost like an internal template of it could work, this approach?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I thought anything I did at that point would work.
So you felt you were untouchable,
Yeah,
literally untouchable.
as a film director.
Yeah, you could do anything.
Yeah.
Were the studios after you? Were they what
No,
they were ready? Did they
not
just
at all.
open? Did let it go? Just whatever you needed? Send
They
more
thought
money?
that the film was costing more than they would like to have spent.
What was the final budget?
I think the final budget was around 13 or 14 million dollars.
When you were done?
Plus added costs
Right.
by the studios. At that time, they would put a big surcharge on the film for financing it,
Right.
which they were entitled to, but which was not spent.
So you'd achieved everything everyone would ever dream of doing, basically. You were in that situation.
I don't think you ever reached that situation
But
because,
you were
as I
close
told
to
you,
it.
frankly, the cast that I would have preferred at the time
Right.
was McQueen, Mastroianni, and Lino Ventura.
Right.
And I always felt that with Paco Rabanne and Bruno Cremer, that it was a compromise. Although now, when it's 30 some years later, I don't know, 37 years or so later, I think they're wonderful.
But
I
back
think they're
then,
great.
you going into this movie, you felt you were compromised with your actors.
In the cast, yeah.
In the cast.
Based on, we wrote these parts for those other guys.
Right.
And so whoever did them was not the first choice for those roles.
And Sorcerer, the title was already from the get-go. How did you come up with that title?
Oh, I was listening to a Miles Davis album called Sorcerer, and I thought, hey, that sounds like a good title. I love the album, and I thought that was a good title. And I also realized at the time that what a sorcerer, in fact, was an evil wizard.
Right.
And in the case of the film, I thought the evil wizard was fate, that controlled the lives of all these people, no matter how heroic they were, or terrified, or adventuresome, or desperate, that their lives were out of their control, which is what I feel about all of us.
Right.
Every single person.
And did the studio
We have
question?
nothing to say about how we come into this world, and nothing to say about how we're going to leave it. And that's the underlying theme of Sorcerers.
It's like a Chinese fortune cookie.
Huh? What are you he's talking about Chinese fortune cookie. What
So-
the fuck is this guy talking about?
That's what you would say when you were my age to Fritz Lang.
I don't think I was ever your age.
So
I think I was
The-
always my age.
brings us to the fact. Then you're living in LA at that time, correct? Is that your home?
I lived in, at that time, in Los Angeles, New
Okay.
York, Aspen, Colorado.
You were a man of the world.
Yeah.
But the post-production was going to be in Los Angeles, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you shot this movie on film, obviously. Was that difficult?
Yeah, there was
in
no
the jungle?
digital.
Was it challenging?
Yeah, of course, because in the jungle, you have sometimes bright sun, and sometimes you have a cloudy day.
Right.
And usually you get both in the course of the same day.
Right.
And so lighting in the jungle is difficult. The bridge scene, which is one of the most difficult scenes I think that may ever have been filmed, as far as I know.
Did you actually put the trucks on the
Yeah,
bridge?
of course.
Because that's one of the amazing things when I rewatched it was that seeing those metal machines on that, like even getting them out there.
That
And
was
there
very
were
difficult.
there stuntmen or were there the actors?
Both.
Okay, so there
The
was
actors are, there's no opticals in the film.
okay.
The actors are, when you see them driving the trucks, they're driving the trucks.
When would you use stunt
Mostly for
people?
the close-ups.
And when would you use stunt people?
In the long shots,
Okay,
when you
so you
couldn't
would use
see
stunt.
who
Okay.
is. And the stunt coordinator was Bud Eakins, who was McQueen's
Right.
stunt double and stunt coordinator.
Because that bridge scene is the editorial, especially when he falls underwater, the use of sound going away, it's magical. It's absolutely
Well, thank you.
magnificent.
Thank
It's
you.
absolutely, it's untouchable. Again, you know, it's so
I
well
know
made.
it's a good scene.
It's an
I know
incredible. No, it's
that.
not. It's an incredible scene.
It was fun to do.
Right.
And understand this, I never take a script with me when I shoot a scene. It's in my head.
Right.
I did not have a storyboard for the bridge scene, but I had all of it in my mind's eye.
Right.
I had everything. I saw the movie in my head, and so going out to film it was only difficult from a physical standpoint, not from the standpoint of what to do when. I knew how I was going to start that scene, end that scene, what the individual moments would be, and I just went out and filmed what was in my mind's eye.
And another thing that I admire about the script and the movie itself is the lack of dialogue.
Except in the first...
yeah, but being someone who makes movies with very little dialogue, I saw a kindred spirit here again, that it's all told through visuals. They're almost like a silent film, the mood, style,
I'll tell you
camera.
why I decided to do that.
Right, was there
And-
more dialogue originally in the script?
No.
Okay,
In Indonesia, when The Exorcist or French Connection played there, it would be run on a screen, very often a sheet that was set up on the wall in some store, and they had a projector, and they'd run the film in various parts of the world, but I remember Indonesia. And they could not afford any subtitles there for the film. They only could get like an American version or a French dubbed version, but they couldn't get one in the language of these particular countries. What would happen is that every 5 minutes or so, they'd stop the projector and a guy would walk out and explain to the audience what they had just seen. And I made a promise to myself that the next film I made would not have to be stopped by a projectionist in Indonesia where a guy had to explain to the audience what they were watching.
So you were
I was
thinking
going
of-
to make a film that you could understand it just by watching it.
so you, in courtesy of the Indonesian people, this movie was going to reach the widest audience around the world.
That's what I had hoped for as a way of reaching audiences.
Okay.
Look, the greatest cinema to me was made in the silent era.
Right.
And you could run Buster Keaton's movies or Charlie Chaplin or D.W. Griffith's films anywhere, and people knew what was going on.
Were you megalomania when you were making the movie?
I don't know what that word means.
Okay, but were you all consuming.
Yeah,
where you
probably.
basically world dominance, that this was going to play every
No,
single word.
it's just a movie. All I was a movie director who had a concept and was bound and determined to fulfill that concept.
Yes, but this is
Not
looking back.
rule
But
the
back
world.
then, it seems like you wanted to rule the world.
No, never. I don't have these fantasies that you have. Why do you attribute your fantasies to me?
I'm just trying to look what I'm going to be like. So I'm thinking ahead.
Well, you better get your head straight because you can get it chopped off.
And that's what happened to you?
Well, to a great extent, sure.
Now, how long does it take to edit this movie?
A matter of some months.
Month. And Tangerine Dream's score, which by the way is unique.
That was done before the film was even shot.
Interesting story. So they did the score based on your script, correct?
And what I had told them when I
Okay.
met them in the Black Forest of Germany at an abandoned church at a concert they were giving.
And you were promoting Exorcist in Germany.
I was on tour in Germany, and someone from the Warner Brothers studios in, it was either Munich or Frankfurt, told me about this incredible group who were playing a concert at an abandoned church in the Black Forest. And I went out there, heard this group, the Tangerine Dream. I met Edgar Frazee, who was the leader, and the
Rest
other.
in peace.
Yeah, he died not long ago from the time we're talking. It was less than a month ago. And I met him. He had not done a score for a film, but this music was incredible. It was the music of the spheres. And it weren't songs.
It's a great album. Yeah.
And I said, look, I want you guys to, I didn't know what my next film was going to be. But I said, I want you to score my next film. I asked them if they would do a score without seeing the movie. Just what I told them, by the time I came up with this idea to do Sorcerer, I met with Edgar Frazee again, told him the story, and when we had a script, I sent him the script. And they just went into a studio in Germany and recorded a whole bunch of their impressions
Right.
of what I had told them and what
So you were
was in
like,
the
you were
script.
directing the score in a very unique way.
But I didn't direct it. I just,
Well, no, but you were defining it for them. You know,
yeah,
you were
it was their
creating it.
sound
Right.
that I wanted them to adapt to the story I had given.
A bit like Dario Argento and the Goblins when he was making with them. He was directing them like you were.
Well, I wasn't aware of that.
Right.
But I love Dario Argento. And his
Everyone
films.
does.
Well, not everyone, but a lot of people do. But one day we were in the jungles at Tuxtepec, and this package arrived from Veracruz, Mexico. It was sent from Germany to Veracruz, Mexico, and it was driven 100 miles to where my location was, and I had this package of their tapes, which I couldn't play because we had nothing to play, gigantic reel-to-reel tapes. So I didn't hear it right away, but I sent it back to Mexico City to get transferred into little cassettes. And I first heard the score on a little cassette recorders.
In the
and I thought it
jungle.
was fantastic.
So did it inspire you? Did that help you?
Definitely,
visions?
yeah. It was
Okay.
tough and mean and rhythmic
Right.
and powerful, what I had expected. No sentimentality.
Right.
I hate sentimentality,
I've noticed.
especially phony sentiment, which so many of the films I see are just filled with phony sentiment.
So now you've cut the film. You put, is the music on when you're going to show it?
Yeah,
okay.
I cut the film to the music a lot of
Right.
times.
So then you go to, is it Universal first or
Yeah.
Paramount or
Because
how?
I was editing at Universal.
Okay, then you show it to Universal.
Well, here's what happened.
Okay.
One day, Lou Wasserman and Sid Sheinberg said, look, when you do get a cut that you like, Sid Sheinberg was head of the motion picture department at Universal, and Wasserman was the overall boss. And they said, one day when you have a cut that you like, can we look at it? And in those days, they could only look at it on what was called a Chem editing machine,
Right.
a Keller editing machine. German made, and it wasn't the kind of digital editing facilities we have now. It was, you put up a reel of film and a reel of sound with a sync mark on both. You'd sync them up and run double system on a screen about this big.
Action.
They
What
loved
happens?
it.
They loved
They thought it was great.
Right.
And Scheinberg said to me, I'll never forget this conversation. He said, how much do you think we're going to do? And The Exorcist by then had taken in $100 million domestic. It has since taken in over $800 million with all the different media. But it was $100 million, and there was no DVD, there was no Blu-ray or anything like that, like no television. So because The Exorcist had taken in $100 million, and I thought this was a better film than The Exorcist. I remember saying to him, I think it'll take it maybe $90 million.
Going in.
Yeah, and he said, wow, yeah, it's great. He said, it's great. And they then set out plans to distribute it.
So then what happens?
They had no doubts when they distributed it.
Okay, so,
Here's one doubt they had.
but what there's a,
All the foreign names bothered them. And I remember this conversation. Scheinberg said to me, in looking at the ad, it said Roy Scheider, then it said Bruno Kremer, Francisco Rabal, Amadou, and Wasserman said, geez, there's a lot of foreign names in this ad. And I said, look, if you want, I'll go to them and ask them to change their names. How's that?
Okay.
And you can pay them. I said, I'll ask Bruno Kremer to change his name to Bob Kramer.
you couldn't help yourself. You
Right.
just needed to stick
Of
the
course.
knife in.
And I said, we'll change this other guy's name to Joe Smith. How's that? I said, if we pay him enough money, I'm sure he'll change his name.
But you didn't care about their testing, you didn't care about their
No.
marketing, anything?
No,
Okay. You had zero interest.
no.
So, you walk down the yellow brick road, you
It
basically...
wasn't a yellow brick road.
Well, you must have felt like Dorothy a little bit.
I can assure you, I've never felt like Dorothy.
But the point is that you must...
Today, it's not unusual for men to feel like Dorothy.
No, I have a
We
Dorothy
live in a
in me.
different world.
I have a Dorothy in me.
You may have a Dorothy outside of you.
Well, Dorothy came out in Cruising. But anyway, the point is this. When you're walking down that road to that newspaper that is important to you, gone through this whole fucking journey, these 3 years of promoting your other movies, you've gone all out on this movie, expecting the glories to hail you, to basically open the gates to everything, and then it doesn't.
I have a question for you. Why do you want to dwell on the dark side?
Because
There's so much more to that film than all of the politics, the chicanery, the practical jokes. All of those things were peripheral to the making of a film like
but see, that's... But
It's like my asking Orson Welles, when he made Citizen Kane, did you have good dinners then? Or did you get laid a lot?
no,
Or,
that's not... no, because what I'm interested
No, I mean,
in...
who cares?
No, that's the point. That's actually the most interesting point.
Why?
Because I'm interested in the thought, what goes through an artist's
I've already
mind,
told you.
which I am getting to now. Knowing
Geez, we've only been here for a fucking
hour and a half, but the point is that
They've
it's
been
just
changing
standing there
cards. Yes.
and you're reading, you probably go in and read the newspaper, whatever this happened, and everything falls apart. Now, did that affect your future career, do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you regret any of the things you had done
I
before?
didn't regret anything.
None of those things you did to your partners?
Absolutely. I don't regret them to this day.
Okay.
Although I say I probably am more mature than I was then, and I probably became an adult at some point and stopped doing that to a great degree, but not totally.
Okay, so now the movie comes out. It doesn't work critically, financially. Is it shelved? Is that what they call it? Is it like put on a shelf?
Oh yeah, I think it maybe ran for a couple of weeks in America.
And that was that.
And, well, Star Wars came out like a juggernaut and took everything.
And no regrets 5 a.m. in the morning when you wake up stressed out? I mean,
Regrets about what? That the film wasn't a success? Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. Anything you did wrong? Things you could have changed?
I don't think there were any things I could have changed. I made the film I wanted to make.
Okay.
Now, to this day, as we're sitting here, today is February 23rd, is it? I have no regrets.
Okay. So the movie shells after a couple of weeks domestically. Internationally, they recut it, as you said.
It was
correct?
recut by CIC.
Without your
And-
approval.
Of course not. But in some cases where what existed was a law called the droit moral, which is primarily French, but it was observed in places like Sweden and other places, the director of the film is held to be the author of the film.
Yeah, we had the same thing in Denmark. We actually won a court
Right.
case for
And
Sidney
Sweden.
Pollack. But the point
I
is-
sued CIC in France and Sweden, a couple of other places.
Did you win?
Yes.
Okay.
It took a while and it cost me some money. But there were many places where the droit moral did
But
not
did
exist.
Paramount Universal care about these cuts? Did they say, hey, Billy, they're recutting your movie internationally?
No, they didn't. It was a disaster.
So they washed their hands?
Absolutely.
Were you kicked out?
Kicked out of what?
Universal?
Yeah. Oh, sure. My deal was finished.
Scrapped,
Yeah. In Hollywood,
right?
which is a lot different from other, let's say, film capitals in the world, in Hollywood, the only thing that matters is financial success.
What does it feel like seeing this movie that had this profound effect on your career, maybe also personally, suddenly springing back to life? Not just back to life, but back to appreciation for what it really was, which is a masterpiece. You're suddenly getting a new audience, a younger audience, a more modern audience, or suddenly seeing all the qualities that you felt that everyone else missed on
No,
the
I
first
didn't.
time it came out,
I never felt anyone missed anything.
right?
Hey,
Then why didn't people go and
Stanley
see it?
Kubrick never won an Academy Award. Alfred Hitchcock never won an Academy Award. Orson Welles never won an Academy Award
I'm in a
except
good
for
group.
screenplay.
I'm in a good group.
No, so I'm saying to you, you know, these are judgments that were made by audiences and critics at the time.
Right.
And now I'm going to tell you how I basically feel about life. It is a continuum. It is not this episode, that episode, that episode. I feel good about this, bad about that. It's all part of an overall plan over which we have very little to say. We try to control our lives, but we can't. You know, you can step off the curb and you're dead. An airplane gets blown. You know what I'm saying? I view my life as a continuum. And not, I don't think of, oh, now Sorcerer is getting, it's all a part of the life of Sorcerer.
But aren't you happy? Aren't you
Of
thrilled?
course, well, yes.
Are you overly joyed that the movie that had such a profound...
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the failure of it was so deep and profound at the time that could never be healed. But what comes as a result of it is just a continuum. I mean, and it's a continuum only up to a point. So I have great respect for the French audience and French critics and the audiences and critics of other countries, but to a lesser extent, frankly, than France. So the fact that a French audience will be able to see it in theaters and on home video gives me great pleasure, absolutely. But it doesn't erase anything of what happened. It doesn't change the fact that when I made this film, it was completely rejected. And here's what that, you've experienced, the last film you made was not successful at the box office and with some critics.
So successful enough because it was cheap, so it made money. Yours didn't. That's the big difference.
No, but there's another difference. There's what you believe you have achieved with what you have done and what you haven't achieved.
Oh, I'm like you. I have no regrets about Only God Forgives. I think it's a masterpiece, and it is. I just didn't make it very
Is there
expensive.
a doctor in the house? we need to get a medic in here. Is there a doctor around?
I just didn't make.
If you
I
think
made
that's
it
a
very
masterpiece, what is Citizen Kane?
It's great, but it was an inexpensive movie, so financially.
Who gives a shit?
No, it does, because that's how you survive. Because if Sorcerer had made a lot of money, your life would have been changed.
Not
but
much.
it didn't,
No.
as you say.
No, not much. I mean, and frankly...
You call yourself the wound that it gave you. It hurted you.
What?
The failure of Sorcerer back then.
I would, look, they're far worse. I've recently lost a number of friends. That's what really hurts. I mean, who have died.
But back then you were so relentless. You were travel to the moon, which that's what I admire. But I guess the love that you feel, the joy, the flow of it being rediscovered, that it was meant to do, because all artists have vanity. And the idea that people are re-embracing what we do, and it's interesting that your films is reaching a whole new younger audience. And I still say, if you looked at French Connection, The Exorcist, this movie, Cruising, and so forth, it's like the movies were made today, like Killer Joe. It's like they never aged. That's a very unique quality to have. But the idea of taking something that hurted you, that had been disowned by everyone, and it coming back to life. You can't tell me at 5 a.m. in the morning that doesn't feel real fucking
I'm asleep
good.
at 5 a.m.
But it
I'm a
feels-
10 o'clock Jew.
Fine.
I
The
go
10
to
o'clock-
bed at 10 o'clock and I don't wake up until maybe 8 or something.
Okay, so when you wake up at 8 a.m. to your black and white cookie, you're not
I don't have
telling-
any cookie.
You're not telling me that you don't feel joy and almost a sense of
I feel something more important.
what?
Lucky to be alive.
Oh my
I
God,
feel
where's the freaking
fortunate-
I knew back
I
then?
feel fortunate to be alive.
Uh-huh.
You know how many of my
But
contemporaries
you to
and
be alive to
associates-
see the rediscovery of this movie? Is that what it is?
Not everyone likes Sorcerer. I have not been able to convert the world. There's no film ever made. I don't think that I don't think much of a lot of films that are called masterpieces. I don't like a lot of Kubrick's films at all. But I think that he has made some of the greatest films ever made. And I don't know how he viewed, I'm sure he was disappointed when a movie didn't do as well as he had hoped it would.
We all do.
Like 2001,
Yeah.
which didn't do well.
But then it got rediscovered.
Well, it was always there.
Yeah, but same thing with your movie. It got rediscovered, and the thing is, maybe your movie was meant for the future.
Well, we can't predict that. Look, it is unusual, as you point out. I recognize that a film comes out again to a new audience in another generation,
clicks.
and that they don't look at it like an old movie. That's the thing that I like the most. For a strange reason, one of the reasons that younger audiences have appreciated this film when I've seen them at various screenings around the world,
Because it's a success around the world now, this
as
movie.
in Denmark and
Yeah,
elsewhere.
everywhere.
And when I see it, one of the things I hear that people like about it is that everything that you see, we did. They're not generated on a computer. We didn't do these effects, scenes, adventures that we had on a computer, on which every action film relies today.
No, it's all in camera.
We did it live, mechanically.
In camera. And
Now, to me, that means nothing. I mean, if I had computers then, I would have used them.
but it means a lot to people nowadays. But on top of that, it's a very modern movie because it's flawed heroes, which is much more relevant maybe this time than it was back then.
Well, let me express to you what I think is the good and bad of Sorcerer. I basically believe, and there's some of this in the film, but I basically believe that a film operates much like a dream. A film is a dream. It's not real people up there. It's projected images that are running at either 24 frames a second or running at a different speed in the digital world. It's like visions, nightmares, dreams that you get not often in your waking hours. And most of the great films operate like dreams. Sorcerer operates on a plane of reality. It's all meant to look and be real, and it is. There's no camera tricks. The bridge is the bridge. The blowing up of the big tree, or when a bank blows up, it's all, we did that. Everything. And one of the reasons it may not have been successful, although today it may have entered a different realm, but at the time it was not about dreams. When I say a film operates like dreams, I'm talking about films like 2001, like Citizen Kane, like a handful of films that draw from an audience endless emotions, fear, joy, sorrow, tears, laughter. Those things are in another realm. And an audience is sitting passively in a chair while these dreams unfold in front of them. One of the problems that I saw about Sorcerer was it is relentless in its reality. And The Exorcist was not. The Exorcist dealt with things that many of the millions and millions of people who have seen it don't believe in. And yet they're watching it, and they're scared to death to this day. Now, there's certainly a number of people who say, oh, that doesn't scare me anymore. That's a 40-year-old movie. Most of the people who see it are still frightened because it taps into emotions that they can't even imagine. You know, the possession of an innocent child by a demon. And that's what The Exorcist is about. Now, there's more bullshit around about the idea of that happening for real than anything. How could a demon possess somebody? What are they talking about?
And Sorcerer?
And Sorcerer, you look at it and you think with every scene, this is happening. There's no question that this is happening. This isn't being done by a demon, whatever that is, nor can it be healed by a religious belief. So Sorcerer is viewed in a different light today by the new audiences that you refer to. They get something else out of it that I'm not sure I completely understand. But I have watched audiences relate to it like a dream. If it does take you over today, it grabs a hold of you and you're involved with it. You're in it.
Absolutely. And I have just two questions left. When you were mentioning...
I have a third. Where is there a medic for this man?
When you were mentioning...
Did you hear the ambulance pull up?
Yes.
Okay.
When you were mentioning 2001, Citizen Kane, you forgot to add Drive. But we'll let that slip.
We won't know about Drive for another 30 years.
30 seconds.
Whether it lives or dies. I'm talking about films. 2001 was made in 1968.
I made this film about 4 years ago, so it's about
4
time.
years is a zip. It's not even a blip. It's not a pimple on the asshole of humanity. 4 years. But 2001 was made in 1968 and holds up like gangbusters. It's better than all this other similar crap. And Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane was made in 1941.
We know that. My point
and
is,
it lives.
okay, last question. Now that I'm a younger version of you,
Who said that?
so you're basically looking into the mirror. This is like Scrooge, okay? You're looking back. What advice will you give a younger self now?
I think you already have it. And that is, you must believe in yourself. You must believe in yourself. Because you're going to encounter along the way in your career what all of the greats have encountered. Which is, you're going to pass out of style. As Billy Wilder did, as Wells, Elie Kazan, name them all. They come to a point where they can't even get hired because the industry has changed completely. You're going to face rejection. You already have to some extent. Forget the film was made so cheap that it made some money. There's rejection, which is why a career I would least advise anyone to go into is to be an actor. Because unless, and even when you become a big star, you're going to face rejection.
So what's your
And
advice?
you must believe in yourself. If you don't have enough belief in yourself, you will not survive. It's a tough business.
Come hell, come high water, you're going to face rejection, you're going to face successes.
And failure.
And
You're
failure.
going to face down and out abject failure. Billy Wilder, who was the smartest man I ever met in Hollywood, couldn't get a meeting for a job for the last 20 years of his life. The same with people like Richard Brooks, who I knew, and Kazan. No studio. I used to be the president of the Directors Guild in New York, and I was first vice president of the National Guild. Kazan was on my board, as was Joseph L. Mankiewicz. These were two giants of filmmaking.
And they couldn't get a job.
Couldn't get a meeting.
So
No one's made better films in America than Kazan or Mankiewicz.
looking into the mirror, seeing your younger self, one sentence.
I said that to you, and I think you already have it. I don't even think it's advice. You do what few other people I've ever met do. You invest your own money in your films. Nobody does that. And one of the reasons we don't is because we're not counting the money that comes in. And very often, the people who count the money that come in have sticky fingers.
Yes, but I'm talking about.
I've never done that. I've never put
I-
money in my film.
Look, I am a younger version of you. You're Billy from the set. Where is that relentless general? Now looking back, what would you want to give
I
to
will
me as
only
advice?
make a film. I turn down more than I do. And very often I withdraw from something I say I'm going to do because I'm mugged by reality.
So what would
Do
you
not
advise?
do a film you don't believe in. Don't make any picture just for the money unless you're desperate. If you're desperate, it's okay. But I'll tell you that I admire you because you have found other ways to subsist and survive. You direct commercials, very good commercials. I think I've made one commercial in my life. You don't view it as a step down. You direct commercials which sustain you between films. You finance your own films. The only other guy I know who did that successfully was John Cassavetes. He was the true independent filmmaker of America. Today these guys call themselves, I'm an independent filmmaker. Somebody else has put up all the money. John Frankenheimer used to mortgage his house every time he made one of his films. He talk about put up your own money. If his film didn't make enough back, he lost his house to make a movie. I've never seen dedication like that. And anyone today who doesn't do that, who calls himself an independent filmmaker, is not. Independent simply means you don't get financed by a major studio. That's all it means today. When John Cassavetes made films like Shadows and Husbands, and even The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and Opening Night, some wonderful films, he put his house up. And if the film lost money, the house went. That's independent filmmaking.
Absolutely, and parent spirit of mind. But you're sitting on a couch right now.
No, I'm in a chair, actually.
You're in a chair. I'm in a chair. Again, I am the William Friedkin of the mid-70s going up that hill. You're the Billy Friedkin of the future, knowing what's going to happen. What do you want to say in one sentence
I gave it to you.
to the Billy Friedkin back then?
You must believe in yourself above all. And that was said better by Polonius in Hamlet, by Shakespeare. Polonius said to Hamlet, "This above all, to thine own self be true." And those are words to live by. Hamlet also says something interesting to his friend, Horatio. At one point in the play Hamlet, he says, "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio." Meaning, open yourself to everything.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do in about 40 years. When they do a pristine print of Cruising, I will fly anywhere and introduce the movie and do a Q&A.
But
And you have my word on that.
Okay, but you got to promise me one more thing.
What?
You will do it as Dorothy.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything for you, Billy.
God bless you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thanks.